Hey! Have you seen this clip?
As I told you, my 2019 resolution is to say things on air that I say off air. I don't think I've washed my hands for 10 years. Really, I don't really wash my hands ever.
Help me!
No, I inoculate myself. It's just not, germs are not a real thing. I can't see them, therefore they're not real.
So
The man-shaped germ in this video is called Pete Hegseth, and he would appreciate if I told you he was only joking in this clip. I don't think he would appreciate it being the thesis of a video about just how stupid he, you, and me are. Ever since I saw this, it has fascinated me. Not just because it's freaking disgusting, but because it kind of explains a lot about everything. You see, I can't see them, therefore they aren't real, is a textbook definition of cognitive bias. A cognitive bias is an incorrect conclusion based on a limited perception. When you look at the horizon and it doesn't look curved, you may be tempted to conclude the Earth is flat. From your perspective on the ground, it can certainly look that way, but you can't see the whole picture. You are drawing an incorrect conclusion based on your limited perception. When you mention a product and Facebook starts showing you ads for that product, is Facebook listening to you? Or is it possible that ads were always there and you just never noticed them because you can train yourself to ignore ads? Or maybe something else triggered those ads to show up, something other than saying mattress out loud. You can't remember everything you Google, yet you've drawn a conclusion anyways. When you notice that African Americans are more likely to be in prison than any other race, does that mean that black people are more likely to commit crimes? Or is it a deep-seated systemic problem left over from centuries of active oppression that has naturally perpetuated itself into the present? Something whose more subtle methods are still unaddressed and unchecked. Perhaps you are only looking in one place and drawing a conclusion about an entire race without considering a wider and more historical perspective. Your narrow view has led to an incorrect conclusion. These are obvious examples. There are many more. Cognitive bias exists everywhere. It is pervasive. It is eternal. It is also natural, and unless you're aware of it, it can be hard to fight. There are many types, and they love to sneak in just as you let your guard down. Let's focus on my favorite cognitive bias, confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the tendency to only look for evidence that supports a previously held belief. For me, whenever I reach a conclusion, I ask myself, where's the control? Whenever you do an experiment, you always do two tests. One where you directly test your hypothesis, and one where you do nothing. Imagine you do a study where you are trying to tell if a new pill will make people grow cat ears. You give the pill to a big group of volunteers. 50% of them grow cat ears after taking the pill. You call it a success and contact the FDA for approval. But wait, what about the other 50% of your volunteers? Where are their cat ears? Who cares? We gave the pill to some people and now they have ears on the tops of their heads. We can ignore the rest as outliers. This is not a scientific study. There was no control group. You need to run the experiment again. This time, you take a new large group of fresh volunteers and divide them into two groups. The first group is your treatment group. You give them your cat ear pill. The second group is your control group. You give them a placebo or a pill that does nothing. This time, to your amazement, 50% of the treatment group grow cat ears and 50% of the control group grow cat ears. Your pill is not better than a placebo. It's essentially useless. In the first experiment, you interpret your results to support your conclusion. If you had been designing a pill that specifically kept people from growing cat ears, you would have called those results a success as well. Granted, not all of us are scientists running secret experiments in Elon Musk's giant mole tunnels. But still, every day, all of us draw conclusions based on our perception of events. But often our conclusions are already formed, and that influences our perception. When you work a retail job, is every customer an annoying ass who has unreasonable demands? Or is the vast majority totally polite and so easy that you forget them the moment they leave? And all you can remember are the customers that wasted your time and told you about their bathroom habits. You look through your memory and think, wow, so many of my customers are rude and awful. Everyone must be rude and awful. And now every time someone walks in that fits that description, it only strengthens your conclusion. But where is your control? Are you also counting the nice, polite, and easy customers? Or are you only counting the ones that support your theory? When you buy a new car, suddenly you start to see that car everywhere. Is that because everyone is copying you? Or is it just that you've never had a reason to pay attention to that particular make and model before? Again, where is your control? How many cars do you see every day? How many aren't your car? How many of your car did you see before you bought your car? Once you learn to recognize confirmation bias, it shows up everywhere. It's amazing the information you ignore when you're not paying attention. And it's natural for humans to try to put things in order. We are amazing pattern recognizers. But when all you look for are patterns, sometimes that's exactly what you see, even if that pattern doesn't exist. Confirmation bias, the term, was coined in 1960, but confirmation bias, the concept, has likely been with us since we've had these brains. All cognitive biases are natural. They are the default state. But even before we had a word for it, people have noticed our tendency to only look for evidence that supports a belief. Dante Alighieri, in his Divine Comedy, references confirmation bias. When Dante visits paradise, he meets the Catholic philosopher Thomas Aquinas, who says, "Opinion, hasty, often can incline to the wrong side, and then affection for one's own opinion binds, confines the mind." Francis Bacon wrote about his observation of this phenomenon, as did German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer and Russian author Leo Tolstoy. Peter Wason, a psychologist, is the person who first studied confirmation bias directly. He is also the one responsible for its misleading name. See, Wason wanted to prove that people were more likely to search for positive clues to a solution than negative ones. The experiment he ran was very simple. He showed people a list of 3 numbers, 2, 4, and 6. Then he asked participants to find out what the rule was that dictated the order of these numbers. The participants were asked to generate their own list of triplets, and the experimenter would tell them if they were right or wrong. If you want to see this experiment in action, go check out Veritasium's video where Derek asks people on the street this same question. The rule was simply any 3 numbers in ascending order. The participants had a very hard time figuring out the rule, mostly because almost any triplet they proposed also worked with the rule. Wason wanted to prove that people often try to get yeses when they ask questions, when in fact there are circumstances where a no would tell you a great deal more. Thus, confirmation bias. However, Wason also proved that people are more likely to get stuck on a certain theory and will try to confirm that theory over and over and ignore all other evidence. For example, if you thought the pattern was ascending even numbers, you would propose the triplets 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 20, 22, 24, and all these would get yeses from the experimenter, but you would be no closer to finding the rule. Confirmation bias says you get siloed and won't break from your belief. An experiment by Joshua Clayman and Youngwon Ha proved that Wason was measuring more than a tendency towards the positive. It was a tendency to seek information that confirms an already held belief. Later experiments confirmed this too, and this is where confirmation bias sits today. So, now that we know all about this hidden bias that we all share, how do we fight it? Simply being aware that this is the way that our brains work is the first step. It is not something you can ever truly escape from. You will always default to these kinds of conclusions. Confirmation bias is a type of heuristic, which is a shortcut we can use to reach conclusions based on limited evidence. Heuristics aren't inherently dangerous, and they can be very useful, but they can be misleading. The danger comes when a heuristic comes up against a scientifically provable conclusion. Sticking to what I've seen with my own eyes versus actual evidence is a common practice in social media, politics, paranormal studies, or job selection. Even science has its examples of confirmation bias overruling real evidence. There are many examples of scientists rejecting conclusions simply because their hypothesis was disproved. It is difficult to leave behind previously held beliefs. For me, when I want to challenge a conclusion, I ask, where's the control? If all my evidence is coming from one direction, maybe I have a bias and need more data. I hope you enjoyed this exploration of confirmation bias. Use this knowledge to help you draw accurate conclusions and make good choices. I know I did. Bye!